The air inside the cage was heavy and cold. Chains rattled each time the alien girl moved even a little. She was thin, her skin marked by bruises, and her long hair tangled like it had not been washed for months. Around her, the floor was hard stone, wet in some corners where water dripped from the ceiling. The cage was small, barely big enough for her to stretch her legs. She had been kept here so long that she had forgotten how it felt to walk freely. The captors treated her like a pet. Sometimes they threw food into the cage, never looking at her as if she were alive. They never spoke kindly, only commands, only laughs at her pain. She had once tried to fight back, but the chains around her wrists and ankles bit into her skin whenever she resisted. The sound of metal on metal was the sound of her days and nights. There was no difference between them, only darkness, hunger, and waiting. Her eyes were the only part of her that still showed strength. Even when her body was weak, her eyes glowed with a hidden fire. She watched everyone carefully, trying to guess if mercy could be found, but there was none. Each time she thought of escape, she looked at her chains and knew it was impossible. Hope had become a memory, and she had almost accepted that this was her life forever. But one evening, something changed. The usual guards walked by, loud in their boots, laughing about their winnings from some game. They did not care about her. But then, footsteps followed, different, slower, heavier. She lifted her head, her heart beating faster, not knowing why. The shadow that fell across her cage was not like the others. It was taller, broader. When the figure stepped closer, she froze. It was not one of them. It was a human. She had heard whispers in the dungeon before. Slaves talked about humans, rare beings, strange creatures who did not belong to this world. Some said humans were dangerous. Others said weak. But none of the stories mattered when she saw him with her own eyes. His face carried scars, his shoulders strong, and his eyes sharp like someone who had seen too much. He stopped near her cage and looked directly at her. For the first time in years, she felt like someone was not looking at her as a pet, but as something else. Her throat was dry. She wanted to speak, but no words came. She thought he would laugh or spit at her like the others. Instead, he stayed silent. His eyes traveled across the chains, the bruises, the filth, and then rested on her face. Something shifted in his gaze, something she did not understand. He moved closer, his hand touching the bars, and for a moment, she thought he might open the cage. Her heart jumped with a wild hope she had forgotten she could feel. But then the sound of boots echoed down the hall, and the human stepped back quickly, pretending he had only been passing. 2 guards came, laughing and pushing each other. They glanced at the human, but did not question him, thinking he was only inspecting the slaves. The alien girl lowered her head, pretending to, though inside her chest the beating of her heart was louder than the chains. The guards left, and silence returned. The human stood still for a long moment, then leaned closer so only she could hear. His voice was low, rough, but the words were clear. "You're not an animal." Her eyes widened. No one had said that to her in all her years inside the cage. She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, he straightened and walked away, his steps fading into the distance. She was left staring at the space where he had stood, the echo of his words alive inside her. She pressed her chained hands to her chest. Her body was still weak, her cage still locked, but something had shifted in her heart. She had been treated as less than nothing for so long. But now a stranger's eyes and a stranger's words had broken through the walls of despair. She did not know if he was friend or enemy, savior or executioner. But for the first time in years, she felt something dangerous inside her, hope. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly. Around her, the dungeon was the same. Chains, stone, dripping water, distant shouts. But the silence carried a different weight now. She could still hear his voice, repeating in her mind. She clung to it like a spark in the darkness. She knew sparks could die quickly, but they could also start a fire. Her hands tightened into fists. The chains clinked, but this time the sound felt less final. Somewhere above, she could hear faint noises, life beyond the walls, freedom that was once only a dream. She wondered if the human would return, or if he had already forgotten her. She wondered if those words were real or only a cruel trick. But deep inside, she already knew the truth. His eyes had not lied. She lifted her head, staring at the dark passage where he had disappeared. She did not know his name, his purpose, or why he had looked at her differently. But she knew one thing. Her life was no longer the same. Something had started, something that could not be chained. The cage still held her body, but her spirit had already begun to move. She whispered to herself, so softly the chains almost drowned it out. Not an animal. And in that whisper, hidden in the silence of the dungeon, began the first spark of rebellion against everything that had broken her. The next day, the girl woke to the sound of heavy footsteps again. Her body was weak, but her eyes opened wide. She remembered the human from the night before, the one who had spoken words no one had ever said to her. Her heart started to beat faster as the shadow returned, long and broad, stretching across the cold stone floor. She held her breath as the figure came into view. It was him. The human walked slowly this time, not rushed like before. His clothes were rough and torn at the edges, marked with dust and battle scars. His boots hit the ground with a steady rhythm, and his shoulders were square, strong, like someone who had carried heavy burdens for too long. He stopped right in front of her cage, and once again his sharp eyes locked on hers. She could not look away. His eyes were not cruel like the others. They were filled with something else, tiredness, anger, but also something she could not name. He studied her in silence, and the silence itself was heavy. For years, she had been invisible, but now it felt like every breath she took was being noticed. The guards nearby were laughing, paying no attention to him. To them, she was nothing more than an animal in chains, not worth guarding closely. The human leaned closer, pretending to inspect the lock of her cage like he was just checking its strength. But when his lips barely moved, she heard his whisper. "Water. Do you need water?" Her mouth opened, but her throat was too dry for words. She nodded weakly. His eyes narrowed with quiet anger. Not at her, but at the chains, the filth, the cruelty around her. Without saying anything else, he slipped a small flask from his belt and pressed it to the bars. He tilted it carefully so no one would see. A single drop touched her lips, then another, and then she tasted water for the first time in days. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she forgot the chains. The water was not much, but it felt like life itself. She swallowed slowly, her hands trembling as she lifted them to the bars, though the chains pulled them back before she could reach fully. He let her sip again before pulling the flask away, hiding it under his cloak as two guards passed by. She froze, terrified, but he only stepped back calmly, nodding at the guards as if nothing had happened. The men barely glanced at him. They kept walking, their voices loud with jokes, leaving the hall echoing with their laughter. When the sound faded, the human turned his face back to her. "Don't thank me yet," he whispered. His tone was rough, but it carried a strange warmth. Her lips parted. Her voice came out cracked, almost broken. Why do you care?" The human stared at her for a long moment. His jaw tightened as if he was holding back words. Finally, he leaned closer, his voice low. "Because I see you, and they don't." Her breath caught. No one had ever said that before. She looked at him, searching for a trick, a lie, but his face remained steady. His scars told stories of pain, of battles she could not imagine, yet his eyes held no mockery when they looked at her. For the first time in years, she felt like she was not invisible. She lowered her gaze, tears burning in her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. Showing weakness was dangerous, but he had already seen it. "You're chained, but you're not broken," he said softly, almost to himself. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the guards would hear it. She wanted to ask him who he was, why he was here, why he risked giving her water when punishment could mean death. But before she could speak, the distant sound of boots echoed again. He immediately moved back, straightening his shoulders, his face turning hard and cold. Two guards turned the corner, their voices angry this time. One of them shouted about a missing piece of meat from the storehouse, while the other cursed at the slaves. They glanced at the human. "Still looking at the pets, stranger?" One of them sneered. The human's face did not change. He shrugged. "Just making sure the chains hold. Looks like this one could still bite." His voice was flat, convincing enough to make the guards laugh. They muttered something about fragile pets and walked past without more suspicion. When their voices faded into the distance, silence filled the hall again. The human slowly looked back at her. His face softened for a second, and then he whispered so quietly she almost thought she imagined it. "Tonight, I'll come back." Her breath stopped. She stared at him, her mind racing. Was he serious? Could she trust him? She had seen too many lies, too many traps to believe easily. And yet something inside her stirred again, the same dangerous spark she had felt when he first spoke. He did not wait for her answer. He gave one last look at the chains around her wrists, the collar on her neck, then turned and walked away. His heavy footsteps echoed until they disappeared into the dark. The girl sank back against the wall of her cage, her heart still racing. She replayed his words in her mind. Tonight. The word burned in her chest like fire. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to hold on to the hope that had begun the moment he first looked at her. But hope was dangerous here. She had seen hope crushed before, shattered like glass under the boots of her captors. Still, she could not push away the memory of his eyes. They had not lied. She curled her knees to her chest, chains clinking softly. For years, her life had been nothing but silence, pain, and emptiness. Now, in just 2 encounters, everything felt different. A stranger had looked at her as if she was more than a pet, more than a chained creature. He had seen her as alive. The darkness of the dungeon surrounded her, but inside her chest something new grew. She did not know if he would return, or if she was fooling herself by believing in him. But one thing was certain. She would not sleep tonight. She would wait. Every sound of footsteps, every flicker of shadow, she would wait for the human. And deep inside, where fear and despair once ruled, she felt something stronger begin to rise. Hope was not just a spark anymore. It was becoming a flame. The dungeon was quiet, the kind of silence that carried danger. The girl sat in the corner of her cage, her knees drawn close to her chest, listening to every sound. She had not closed her eyes once. Her heart beat faster with every minute because of the promise the human had whispered. Tonight. The guards were fewer now. Most of them had gone to drink or sleep, their voices fading into the upper halls. Only 2 remained somewhere in the distance, their footsteps slow and careless. The dripping water from the ceiling was louder than their patrol. The girl's hands trembled slightly as she waited, unsure if he would really come back. She had been lied to before, promised freedom that never came. But when she remembered his eyes, she could not shake the feeling that this was different. A shadow moved at the far end of the hall. She stiffened, pressing her back hard against the wall. For a moment, she thought it was only her imagination. But then, heavy boots touched the stone again, steady, careful, each step controlled. Her breath caught. It was him. The human appeared out of the darkness, moving silently, keeping close to the wall until he reached her cage. This time, his eyes were sharper, more determined. He did not speak right away. He only crouched down in front of the bars, studying the chains and locks that bound her. She wanted to whisper his name, but she did not even know it. All she could do was whisper one word, weak but clear. You came. His mouth tightened into something almost like a smile, though it carried no joy. I said I would. Her throat felt dry again, but not from thirst. Why? Why risk yourself? He leaned closer, his voice low, barely a breath, because no one deserves this. He tapped lightly on the iron bars. Not you. Before she could answer, he pulled something from his belt, a small piece of metal, sharp at the edge. He held it against the lock of the cage, testing its strength. The sound of scraping filled the silence. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared the guards would hear it. She reached forward, her chains clinking, and whispered urgently, "They will kill you if they catch you. Then I'll make sure they don't." His reply was quick, calm, like he had already accepted the danger. She stared at him, shocked by his words. For years, no one had lifted a hand for her. Now this stranger risked his life just to give her water. And now, freedom. She wanted to trust him, but fear pressed heavy on her chest. She lowered her voice. You don't know what they do here. You don't know how cruel they are. His eyes met hers again, steady, unshaken. I've seen cruelty before. I've survived it. Something in his tone silenced her. His scars, his rough hands, his calmness in this place. They were proof he had lived through things she could not imagine. For the first time, she believed that maybe he could really do it. The scraping grew louder as he worked the lock. Each second felt endless. She kept glancing down the hall, her whole body tense, waiting for the sound of boots. Her chains rattled softly as she shifted, nerves twisting her stomach. The human paused for a second, raised a finger to his lips, then continued. Finally, with a sharp click, the lock snapped open. The sound was small, but to her it was thunder. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she could not breathe. The door of the cage creaked slightly as he pushed it. She gripped the bars, her hands trembling. "It's open," he whispered. Her chains still bound her wrists and ankles, but the cage was no longer holding her. She slid forward, her weak legs barely able to move. He reached inside and caught her under the arm, steadying her. The warmth of his hand shocked her. No one had touched her gently in so long. The chain around her neck clinked loudly as she moved. Both froze. In the distance, a guard coughed. She pressed against the human, her breath shallow, praying the sound would not bring them closer. After a long silence, the footsteps of the guards faded again. Only then did he let out a slow breath and continue. He pulled at the iron cuffs around her wrists, testing their locks. These were heavier, harder to break. He whispered, "This will take longer." She shook her head quickly. "No, not now, if they hear." Her voice shook, but her eyes pleaded. "Just get me out of the cage. That's enough." The human hesitated, then nodded. "We'll deal with the rest later." He slipped his arm under hers again, helping her to her feet. She almost collapsed, her legs weak from years of crouching on the stone floor. Without hesitation, he lifted her up into his arms. Her breath caught. She was light, too light, as if she were made of feathers and bone. He carried her as if she weighed nothing. Her face pressed against his chest, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. But safety was an illusion here. From the far end of the hall, the sound of boots suddenly echoed again. Faster this time. Closer. The human froze, his grip tightening around her. She held her breath, every muscle in her body tense. The shadow of a guard stretched along the wall. The human pressed her closer to his chest, his eyes narrowing. He whispered so softly she barely heard it. "Stay quiet." The footsteps grew louder, echoing down the hall like drums of doom. She could feel his heart beating under his chest, strong and steady, even as danger approached. She closed her eyes, clutching at his shirt with chained hands. The guard's voice rang out, muttering curses about long shifts and bad ale. His boots stopped only a few steps away. The girl's heart nearly stopped. She did not dare to breathe. The human's hand shifted, reaching for the knife at his belt. But then the guard turned, spat on the ground, and walked in the other direction, his voice fading once again into the distance. The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. The human exhaled slowly, lowering his knife. His eyes met hers, and he gave a small nod. "We move now." She clung to him, fear still burning in her chest, but another feeling was there too. Something stronger, something new. For the first time in years, she was not waiting for death. She was waiting for freedom. The night air inside the dungeon was heavier than before, carrying the smell of rust and damp stone. The girl sat with her back against the wall of the cage, her wrists raw from the iron cuffs that held her. Her body ached from years of captivity, but her heart beat faster than it ever had. The cage door was unlocked now, left slightly open by the human. Freedom was close, but the chains on her wrists and ankles still dragged her down. The human crouched beside her, his eyes scanning the cuffs carefully. In his hand, he held the same sharp piece of metal he had used on the lock. He pressed it against the first shackle, his jaw tight with focus. The sound of scraping filled the small space, echoing softly through the hall. She flinched at every spark of noise, her fear rising like fire. If the guards came now, there would be no chance to escape. She whispered, her voice trembling. "Stop. If they hear, they will kill you. They will kill us both." He did not stop. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, hard and determined. "Then they'll have to kill me," he whispered back. The words struck her harder than the chains ever had. For years, no one had cared if she lived or died. But now, this stranger spoke as if her life mattered more than his own. She stared at him, trying to understand why. His scars, his rough hands, his calm voice, he had suffered too, yet he chose to risk himself for her. The cuff creaked under the pressure, bending slowly. He gritted his teeth, twisting the metal tool with force. A sharp snap echoed as the lock broke and the iron band around her wrist loosened. She gasped, pulling her hand free. For the first time in years, her skin was no longer bound. The sound of the breaking shackle was too loud, and both of them froze. Footsteps thudded somewhere above, faint but real. She grabbed his arm quickly, whispering in panic. "They will hear. Please, not now." But his eyes stayed locked on hers. "No, not halfway. If you stay chained, they'll put you back in the cage. We finish this." Her chest rose and fell quickly, fear choking her. She wanted to argue, but deep inside, she knew he was right. If she left this place still chained, she would never truly be free. She bit her lip and nodded, her hands trembling. He moved to the shackle on her other wrist. The metal scraped louder this time. Hat and sweat beaded on his forehead as he forced the lock. She could see his muscles straining under his sleeves, every movement filled with quiet strength. He was not only freeing her, he was fighting against the entire weight of the world that had crushed her. Her heart pounded with every sound, every second. At last, the second lock snapped, the iron falling uselessly to the floor. She pulled her hand back, staring at her wrists, free for the first time. Her breath caught in her throat. She almost forgot how it felt to move without pain. But there was no time to rest. He grabbed the shackles on her ankles next. She shook her head desperately, whispering, "We must go. They will come. Trust me," he said, his voice sharp but steady. She bit back her fear, watching him fight the lock. The scraping of metal against metal filled the air again, louder than before. Her body tensed with every noise. Then suddenly, a voice called out in the distance, "Who's down there?" Her blood turned cold. The human froze for a second, his tool still inside the lock. The footsteps grew closer, heavy and fast. She felt panic rise, but he did not stop. He twisted the tool hard, forcing the lock open. The iron snapped with a violent crack, just as the guard's torchlight appeared at the far end of the hall. The human dropped the broken shackle and grabbed her, pulling her out of the cage. She stumbled, her legs weak, but he caught her, holding her steady. The guard shouted, his voice echoing, "Hey, what are you doing there?" There was no more time for silence. The human pulled her close and whispered, "Run." She had no strength left in her legs, but he half dragged, half carried her through the dark corridor. The sound of her chains, still hanging from her ankles, clinked with every step, but the air felt different now. It was not the sound of captivity. It was the sound of escape. Behind them, the guard's voice grew louder as he called for others. More footsteps thundered in the distance. The girl's breath came fast and shallow, fear pressing her chest. Yet, even as danger closed in, there was a wild fire inside her. Her chains were broken. She was not a pet anymore. The human gripped her tighter, his voice a low growl meant only for her ears. "No matter what happens, don't stop." She nodded weakly, her eyes wide with fear and determination. For the first time, she was not alone. Someone fought for her. Someone refused to leave her in the dark. The hall ahead stretched long and uncertain, shadows flickering as torches burned. The sound of pursuit grew louder, guards shouting, weapons clanging. But the chains on her wrists were gone, the cage was behind her, and her heart no longer belonged to the dungeon. The human carried her forward, every step heavy with risk, every breath filled with danger. And in that moment, as the alarms of the fortress began to ring, she realized something she had thought was impossible. Her life had truly begun again. The alarm bell rang through the stone halls, sharp and deafening. Red lights flickered along the walls, and the sound of boots hammered against the floor. Guards shouted to each other, their voices growing louder as they rushed toward the lower chambers. The human gripped the alien girl's hand tightly, pulling her along. She stumbled with every step, her ankles still heavy from the broken chains, but he did not let her fall. Her breath came in quick bursts. The cold air stung her lungs as they ran through the narrow corridor. Behind them, the voices of the guards echoed closer and closer. She could hear weapons clashing against armor, the shouts of anger and orders to block the exits. Fear burned inside her, but stronger than fear was the fire of survival. She was out of the cage now. She would not go back. The human stopped suddenly at a corner, pressing her against the wall. He held up a hand, signaling for silence. Two guards stormed past the hallway ahead, their shadows stretching long under the torchlight. She pressed her chained hands against her chest to quiet their rattling. The human waited, his eyes sharp, his breathing steady despite the chaos around them. When the guards were gone, he pulled her forward again. They ran down another hall, darker this time, leading toward the outer gates. But the dungeon was a maze, built to confuse and trap. At every turn, more voices came, more footsteps, more danger. The girl's legs trembled, her strength nearly gone, until suddenly she stumbled and collapsed. The human caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her into his arms without slowing down. "You can't run," he said in a low voice, his breath heavy. "Then I'll carry you." Her eyes widened as she clung to his neck. No one had ever carried her before, not like this, not with such determination. He moved fast, his boots striking the ground like thunder. The chain around her ankles scraped the floor, leaving marks behind them. She pressed her face into his chest, the smell of sweat, dirt, and blood filling her senses. He was strong, stronger than she thought any human could be. But strength had limits. From behind, a group of guards appeared, their weapons raised. "Stop there!" one shouted. The human turned sharply, ducking into another hall. The sound of arrows hitting the stone wall rang out, one barely missing his shoulder. The girl gasped, clutching tighter, but he did not falter. He ran faster, every muscle in his body straining. They burst into a wide chamber lit with burning torches. At the far end, a heavy iron gate stood closed, their only way out. But between them and freedom, 4 guards blocked the path, blades shining in the light. The human set the girl down gently against the wall, his eyes never leaving the enemies. "Stay here," he said firmly. Her heart raced. "No, they'll kill you." He looked at her, his jaw set. "Then they'll try." The guards rushed forward. The human drew the small knife he carried, nothing compared to the swords they wielded. But his movements were sharp, fast, like he had fought battles many times before. The first guard lunged, but the human sidestepped and slammed his elbow into the man's throat. The guard collapsed, choking. Another swung his sword, and sparks flew as the blade scraped the wall when the human ducked low. He stabbed upward, the knife sinking into the man's side. The girl's hands shook as she watched. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She wanted to close her eyes, but she couldn't. She had never seen anyone fight like this, not against so many, not with such rage and skill. A third guard came from behind. The girl cried out, "Behind you!" The human spun just in time, catching the soldier's wrist before the blade could strike. With a twist, he broke the man's arm, then shoved him to the ground. The last guard hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. But orders were stronger than fear, and he charged. The human caught the strike with his forearm, gritting his teeth as the blade cut into his skin. Blood ran down, but he didn't let go. With a brutal push, he sent the guard crashing against the wall, unconscious. Breathing hard, the human turned back to her. His arm bled, his face glistened with sweat, but his eyes burned with fire. He grabbed her again and carried her toward the gate. The iron bars were shut tight, locked with chains. He set her down and pulled at the gate, but it did not move. His jaw clenched. "No time for quiet now," he muttered. He raised his knife and smashed it against the lock. Metal clashed against metal, sparks flying. The girl looked around wildly, knowing the noise would draw more guards. "Hurry," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please hurry!" The footsteps of pursuit grew louder again. Shouts filled the halls behind them. The human struck harder, the lock bending, cracking, refusing to give way. His injured arm trembled, but he kept going. Finally, with one last violent strike, the chain snapped apart, and the gate swung open with a loud groan. Fresh air rushed in. Cold wind touched her face for the first time in years. Her eyes widened, tears spilling before she could stop them. Freedom was only steps away. The human lifted her once more and ran into the night. Behind them, guards spilled into the chamber, their angry shouts rising into the sky. Arrows flew, striking the walls, but none touched them. As they disappeared into the darkness of the outside world, the girl clung to him tighter. Her body was weak, but her spirit was alive, burning brighter with every step away from the dungeon. For the first time since her capture, she could see the stars. The chase was not over. She knew they would hunt them. She knew danger still followed like a shadow, but she was no longer chained, no longer a pet. She was free, carried by someone who had risked everything to save her. Her voice broke through the rushing wind, soft but filled with something new. "Don't let me go." His grip tightened around her. "I won't." And together, they vanished into the night, chased by danger, but driven by hope. The forest outside the fortress was dark and endless. The human pushed forward, his steps quick but careful, carrying the alien girl in his arms. His breath came heavy, but his grip on her never loosened. The cold night air cut against their skin, and the sound of alarms still echoed faintly from behind. She clung to him, her eyes wide as she looked up at the stars above the trees. It was the first time in years she had seen the sky, and the sight made her chest ache. When he finally slowed, he found a hollow space between two broken stones, covered by thick vines. He placed her gently on the ground, his body tense as he listened for the sound of pursuit. Only the wind and the call of distant night birds filled the silence. For the moment, they were safe. The girl sat up weakly, her hands brushing over the grass. Her fingers trembled at the softness of it. After years of cold stone and rusted chains, the feel of the earth under her palms felt unreal. Tears welled in her eyes, though she tried to hide them. The human crouched in front of her, studying her carefully. "You need food, water." His voice was firm, but there was concern in it. He pulled out a small bag from his side and handed her a piece of dried bread. She looked at it, then at him, hesitating. "It's yours," she whispered. He shook his head. "I can get more. Eat." Her hands trembled as she lifted the bread to her lips. The taste was dry and rough, but to her, it was sweeter than anything she remembered. She chewed slowly, each bite filling her with warmth. He gave her water next, letting her drink until her thirst eased. For the first time, she felt her body beginning to remember what it meant to live. She looked at him, her voice soft. "Why do you do this? You don't even know me." The human's eyes darkened as he glanced away, his jaw tightening. "I know enough. I know you're not what they say you are. And I know no one deserves to be chained like that." She studied him quietly. His face was lined with scars, his eyes carrying the weight of battles she could not imagine. He had his own pain, his own story. Yet here he was, risking everything for her. The thought sent warmth through her chest. A sudden sound in the distance made them both freeze. Branches cracked, footsteps heavy on the ground. The girl's heart raced, panic rising again. But the human reached for his knife, his body lowering into silence. He motioned for her to stay still. Two guards appeared between the trees, their torches casting a glow on the forest floor. They were searching, their voices low but angry. The human pressed his hand gently over the girl's arm, keeping her still. She held her breath, her entire body trembling as the guards moved closer. The torchlight passed so near, she could see the metal of their armor glinting. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared they would hear it. One of the guards stopped, turning his head sharply as if sensing something. The human's muscles tensed, ready to fight. But then the other guard called out, and both moved deeper into the forest, their light fading. The girl let out the breath she had been holding, her shoulders shaking. The human remained silent for a moment longer, then lowered his knife and looked at her. "We can't stay here long. They'll search the whole forest." She nodded, wiping her tears quickly. "I'll try to walk." He helped her up, his arm supporting her. Her legs wobbled, weak from years of sitting in chains, but she pushed herself forward, one step at a time. Every step felt painful, but she refused to stop. The human walked beside her, ready to carry her again if she collapsed. Hours passed as they moved through the forest, avoiding torchlight, following only the stars above. The girl stumbled often, her body trembling with exhaustion. But each time she looked up and saw the human's steady face, she found the strength to keep going. He never complained, never showed doubt. His presence was like a shield against the darkness. At last, they reached a small stream that glowed under the moonlight. The water was clear, flowing gently over the rocks. The girl knelt by the edge, cupping the water in her hands. She drank, the coolness spreading through her body like life itself. She splashed her face, wiping away the dirt and blood, her silver hair catching the moonlight for the first time in years. The human sat on a rock nearby, watching quietly. His arm still bled from the cut he had taken earlier, but he ignored it. The girl noticed, her eyes widening. She moved closer, pointing at the wound. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, brushing it off. She shook her head, her voice firmer. "It is something. You saved me, and you bleed because of it." She tore a strip from the edge of her ragged dress and reached for his arm. He hesitated, but then allowed her to wrap the cloth tightly around the wound. Her hands were gentle, careful not to hurt him. When she finished, she looked into his eyes. "You risked everything, for me." He held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "I told you, you're not an animal. You're not a pet. You're alive. That's enough." Her heart ached at his words. For so long, she had been treated as less than nothing. Now, this stranger had given her food, water, freedom, and dignity. She wanted to say more, but her voice failed her. Instead, she simply whispered, "Thank you." The human looked away, as if the words were too heavy for him to accept. He stood, scanning the trees again. "We rest here for a while, then move before dawn. They won't stop hunting." The girl nodded, but her eyes lingered on him. She felt something stirring inside her, something new, something strong. It was more than gratitude, more than hope. For the first time, she felt that she was not alone in the universe. She had someone who would fight for her, someone who saw her as more than a chained creature. She lay down by the stream, the sound of flowing water soothing her. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, the night air fresh against her skin. As her eyes closed, she whispered softly to herself, a promise she had never dared to make before. "I will not go back." And with the human watching over her, she believed it. The sky began to change as dawn touched the edges of the forest. A pale light spread across the horizon, chasing away the shadows of the night. The alien girl sat close to the stream, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the human as he checked the ground for signs of pursuit. His face was sharp with focus, his body tense like a predator waiting for danger. She knew the chase was not over. Her wrists still bore the marks of the chains, her ankles still heavy with scars. But the morning air felt different. The world outside the dungeon was alive, filled with the sound of birds, rushing water, and the whisper of leaves. She inhaled deeply, clinging to the feeling of freedom even as fear pressed at the edges of her mind. The human returned to her side. "They're close," he said quietly. "We don't have much time." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "You should leave me. I'm slowing you down. If they catch us." He crouched, meeting her eyes with fierce determination. "I didn't risk everything to walk away now. If they want me, they'll have to go through me first." Her throat tightened. She had been abandoned before, left to rot in chains while others turned their backs. But his words were unshakable, like stone. She could not decide if he was brave or foolish, but she knew he was different from anyone she had ever met. The crack of branches snapped their attention. Voices carried through the trees, angry and urgent. The girl's heart raced. The human pulled her behind a fallen log, crouching low as torches flickered between the trunks. The guards moved in groups, spreading out, their weapons drawn. They were hunting not just a runaway slave, but the human who had humiliated them by breaking her free. The girl's breath shook, and she pressed her hand against her mouth to stay silent. The human's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. His eyes stayed locked on the enemies, calm but sharp. A guard broke from the others, moving closer. His boots crushed the leaves, his torchlight sweeping dangerously near their hiding place. The girl's pulse pounded in her ears. If he stepped a little further, he would see them. She clutched at the human's arm, fear burning in her chest. But before the guard could turn, another voice shouted in the distance. "This way! Tracks in the mud!" The guard cursed under his breath and ran toward the call. The sound of boots faded deeper into the forest, leaving only silence once again. The girl sagged against the log, her whole body trembling. The human leaned close, whispering, "Not much longer. We just need to reach the hills. From there, they'll never find us." She nodded weakly, though exhaustion dragged at her bones. Her body was not ready for this endless running, but her spirit refused to break. She would not return to chains, not when freedom was so close. They moved again, slipping between trees, climbing over rocks, the forest growing thinner as the land began to rise. The human guided her every step, sometimes lifting her when her legs failed. His arm never faltered, his grip never loosened. By the time they reached the base of the hills, the sun had begun to climb higher. Warm light spilled over the land, painting everything in gold. The girl stopped, staring at the wide view of the valley below. The air was fresh, open, endless. Tears blurred her eyes as she whispered, "I never thought I'd see the world again." The human looked at her quietly, then said, "It's yours now. No one can take it back." Before she could answer, the sound of horns shattered the peace. She turned sharply to see figures emerging from the trees behind them. Dozens of guards poured out, their armor glinting in the morning sun. They had followed closer than expected, and now the chase was over. The girl's knees weakened. "No, they found us." The human pulled his knife, his stance firm. "Then we fight." She shook her head, panic rising. "There are too many. They'll kill you." His eyes did not waver. Then they'll kill me standing, not running. The guards advanced quickly, shouting war cries as they raised their weapons. The human stepped in front of the girl, shielding her with his body. Her heart screamed in her chest. She could not let him die for her, not after everything he had given. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. Not alone. She pushed herself to her feet, her body weak but her spirit unshaken. She grabbed a broken branch from the ground, holding it like a weapon. The human turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. She met his gaze, fire burning in hers. You freed me. I will fight with you. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then a small, fierce smile touched his face. He nodded once. Together, then. The first guard charged, and the human met him head-on, his knife flashing. The girl swung her branch with all her strength, striking another across the head. Pain shot through her arms, but she did not stop. They fought side by side, every strike fueled not by power but by will. The battle was chaos, shouts, steel, the clash of bodies. The human moved with deadly skill, protecting her with each strike. She fought with desperation, each blow a promise to herself never to be caged again. Blood stained the ground, and the morning air filled with the roar of battle. When the last guard fell, silence spread across the hills. The girl stood shaking, her hands raw, her chest heaving. The human, covered in cuts and blood, dropped his knife and caught her before she collapsed. She clung to him, tears streaming down her face. You didn't just break my chains, she whispered. You gave me my life back. He held her tightly, his voice low but steady. And no one will ever take it again. As the sun rose fully over the horizon, the girl looked out at the endless world before her. The chains were gone, the cage was behind her, and at her side stood the human who had risked everything to save her. For the first time, she truly believed in tomorrow.